of a half-decent portfolio and how to present it with my friend Kian Lavi. So just a couple announcements before we start. First of all, we are Denver UX newbies, and our unofficial mission is basically to network and learn fun new things together. I just kind of made that up right now, so haven't run that by the group yet. Anyways, so our next event is coming up in September, and we're planning a 2-night event with ServiceNow. It's going to be kind of like small, short talks about UX, great stuff to come. So I don't have that up yet, but I will have that up soon. So look forward to that information coming soon. And next up, I wanted to talk a little bit about the SDXD events, and James is here. So I'll let James go ahead and talk about his events. Hold on, there we go.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for the intro, Lene. Can I get a quick SDXD in all caps for my SDXD peeps who are here? Thank you so much. Just wanted to do a quick shout out for our upcoming events. So next Wednesday, we're gonna have an interactive workshop on writing how it works, getting your team on the same page. How many times have you handed off some requirements or a prototype only to get slacked moments later by a dev or a PM? Hey, what was it supposed to do here? Well, the goal of this workshop is to alleviate that by providing you with a really concise, accurate, lightweight framework. So join us for that. And next slide, please. On September 23rd, we'll be welcoming Paige Bennett, Design Research Manager over at Dropbox's growth team, on bringing research findings to life. So she's actually a former journalist, and she's going to talk about the importance of storytelling, a competitive narrative, and then she's going to dive into just techniques, tips, and strategies for really making sure your findings stand out in the hearts and minds of your stakeholders, no matter your team size and budget. So if you're interested in either of those, please visit this link that I just dropped in the chat, and we look forward to seeing you there. Back to you, Lene.
Great, thanks, James. James is so much better at describing events than I am. I should just have you come on and talk about our events too, like every time. Thank you. Thank you for that. Those sound really exciting. I'm excited to attend them as well. Also on my list, I got a promo code for this big design conference. It's September 10th through 12th. So if you go to the Denver UX Newbies meetup page, you can get that code if you're interested in checking that conference out. It's in the comments on the discussion board for our group. Also on that discussion board is the information for ACC's, that's Arapahoe Community College, their UX class that's coming up in September. If you're still interested in possibly looking into that class, the last day to register is August 30th. So that information is on the board if you're interested. I thought it was a great class, so I highly recommend anyone who wants to learn more about UX to do that. Also tonight, we might try that virtual happy hour again. I know last time it got cut off just because we went over so much. I think we were done at like 8:30. So this time, hopefully, we're gonna try to keep the questions a little bit shorter and maybe have a little bit of time for networking and virtual happy hour. So please stick around for that event. Now, at this point, I would normally talk about the bio of our speaker, but I know it's kind of in his presentation already. So I just wanted to share with you how I know Kian Lavi. We actually worked together at Sony in San Diego when I lived in San Diego. I know a lot of you probably already know that. I talk about it all the time. So we worked together in Sony. I was in the wellness department, and I was a personal trainer for a very long time in my life, about 10 years. And so I was actually Kian's personal trainer when he was working for Sony. So it's just kind of cool that we've kept in touch all these years, and now he's here to speak for our group. He works for Facebook now, no longer at Sony. So I'm really happy that he's still here today in my life, and he's able to speak for us. So Kian, are you ready to go? Kian?
I see a thumbs up.
Oh, I thought I was muted by you guys. I was muted by myself.
Do you need me to put your presentation on the board, or do you have it?
You can just pin my video, actually. We're gonna try something fun tonight. We'll see if this works. As long as you can see my video, you should be fine.
Okay.
Cool. So, with that said, hi, I'm Keon. Like Lene said, we're old friends from back in, I want to say 2013 now. And I'm really excited to come talk to you guys. So, let me get out of this boring Zoom look and let's figure this out. Tonight I'm trying some weird software that I don't know if it'll work, but we'll try.
Which software is this that you're using?
It's something called
Oh, we're using that in one of my teams too. I thought so. That's why I asked, because you look like this other guy that does this too.
We'll try it out.
Yeah.
Can everyone see me all right? I got a thumbs up? Cool. Cool. Awesome. So with that said, let me just jump right in. Probably switch screens. Cool. So welcome. Today we're going to talk about the art of a half-decent portfolio and how to present it. But first, I would love a little bit of audience participation. I would love for all of you to raise your hands if you feel confident in your portfolios and how you present your work. And I'm going to give you instructions, so you can just wait for a second. But you can be honest. I want to get a baseline for how you all feel about your work, your portfolios, how you present your work. So there's going to be 3 options. You can wiggle your hands if you feel like your portfolio is okay, but you're freaked out when it comes time to improving it, writing more case studies, talking about your work with coworkers. You can give me 1 or 2 thumbs up if you think your process is perfect. You don't need this class. Actually, I don't even know why you're here. And C3, you can just wave your hands in the air if you feel like you're drowning and everything sucks. So with that said, let's see if I can switch screens again. Go for it. Cool. I see Hunter's drowning. Everyone else seems like they're just about okay. That makes me, I'm glad. That's why we're all here. So that's good. Let's keep that in mind. And in about 63 slides, we'll come back to this. Sound good? Cool. So the first thing that you should ask at any talk really is who the person speaking to you is. So I would love to talk to you guys about that first. Who am I? My name is Keon. Let me just make sure one thing. It's working. Oh, there we go. My name is Keon, and I spend most of my time thinking about design at Facebook, if that wasn't already obvious. This is me. This is the picture you saw in my bio. And a lot of the questions I get from people are what do you work on at Facebook? Why do you work there? And the funny thing is, you know, I'm not like the designer for all the Instagram apps. I don't design like how you use Facebook stories. I'm not even the reason why you're crazy on is sharing conspiracy theories. I work on a very specific set of products, as does pretty much everyone who works at Facebook. And the reason why I work there is pretty boring. The reason why I work there is because a recruiter reached out to me a few years ago when I was freelancing. I decided I wanted to break from freelancing, and here I am. I'll dive into this a little bit more. But everyone always thinks that this is kind of like this monolithic, scary, big place, and I want to kind of dispel that a little bit for y'all. So what do I work on? Right now, I mostly work on privacy tools within Facebook, and I'm sure that's a meaningless thing to you. For the first 3 years that I worked at Facebook, I worked on targeting within our ads platform. So if any of you guys have a small business or just your own business, you've probably run ads on Facebook before. I was part of the team that designed the tools that you would have worked on. So right now, I recently switched to working on the privacy team, which is generally in charge of all of the privacy and safety of your data, your experience on Facebook. So across all of the Facebook apps, that's like Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger, anything that Oculus makes, we basically decide how to build more private versions of those things and how to make those things work in a way that makes you feel safe and protected. So this is a little example of 2 of the products I work on, off Facebook activity and access your information. Hopefully no one is judging me for my battery being low in these screenshots. And these 2 products really specifically help you see some of the data that other advertisers and businesses pass back to Facebook and how you can control that. And also just the data that you provide Facebook and giving you access to that so you can do with it what you'd like. So these are the 2 things I work on. And yeah, this is actually my real data. Fortunately, when I took these screenshots, the screenshots were pretty neat. But other times I've given this demo, there are some weird things that show up. These are all products you can go out and use yourself. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you guys about is, what does a path to get here look like? I know a lot of you are newer in your careers, maybe you're new to UX or design, and I was at some point too in my life, and talking to someone who worked at another company seemed really scary. Talking to someone at Facebook or just any place that I thought was interesting, I was kind of in shock. Like, how do I even get myself there? How do I conceive of the work to get there? And one of the things I want to help dispel is that it's really easy, and very often it's not. It's a long, circuitous path, and a lot of people like to shorten it and show you their LinkedIn and show you how they jumped from one place to the next willy-nilly. But the real thing I want to show you guys is that we're all people. We all have our own path, our own experiences. Those experiences look different, and they're not as straightforward as we think. So I'm going to go back to when I was in college, when I first met Lene, or right after I met Lene. I graduated from UCSC back in 2013, which to me feels like a long time ago, but is probably not very long ago. And I started this internship at Sony. I was really fortunate to get this experience working on one of our user experience teams there. And we basically worked on how to refine the user experiences for a lot of the consumer electronics that were released in the US. So I got to work on smart TVs and digital cameras and Android phones and all sorts of fun things. For about a year of my life, I was paid to basically play with toys and write research reports on how good Sony's electronics were or not. It was a really fun experience, but also one that felt extremely limiting for me. I can be kind of chaotic. I can be kind of abstract and a weird thinker. And Sony was very by the books. It was a very old company, could be very rigid sometimes. And I always struggled to find my way there. I was always trying to look for new projects and collaborate with other people. And I was frequently told to kind of stay in my lane and work on the things I worked on. So after about a year of working there, I decided to move on. I thought, I was in San Diego for that year after college. I thought it would be easy. I'll just find a job at a startup, move off to San Francisco, and live my new life as a designer, and I'll be a cool designer like everyone else I saw online. And what I didn't realize is actually how hard that would be at first. I spent the next 6 months of my life unemployed, questioning all of my experiences that got me there, questioning why I was doing what I was doing. And I was in a really dark place personally. I started Lyft driving because I didn't have any money to pay my bills. And I started wondering if design was still the right path for me. Fortunately, one day I made a message, or I put out a message online to a bunch of my friends from UCSC. And one of my fellow alumni had a friend who was starting a startup and said that they'd put me in touch. And very shortly thereafter, I managed to get my first job at this friend's startup. I worked at the startup for a while and was really excited, putting on lots of different hats, working on web design and front-end engineering and coding and sales and marketing and all sorts of things, and getting to do all the design I wanted to do. And it felt really fulfilling for a minute. And not 6 months later, I was very unceremoniously fired from this friend's startup. And I say this to you because this is a thing that happens. If you looked at my resume, this isn't a thing I mentioned. It maybe says I quit. If you talk to my previous employers, I might have told them I just quit. But I want to show you guys in a vulnerable moment, this is a part of my history. This is a part of my path. I was unfortunately in a pretty toxic work environment, a place where I wasn't succeeding or being very happy. And that moment of being fired, I thought was going to end my career. I thought it would ruin everything. It'd be like this dark mark that I'd live with forever. And it actually turned out to be one of the better experiences looking back a few years later. But back in that moment, I found myself in another dark place. I was unemployed yet again, stuck in San Francisco, paying rent that was astronomically high for no reason. And months went by before I ever got my first freelance client. And I was so excited. And the only work that they had for me was for me to make a slide deck. And I made a few $100s after 3 or 4 months of being unemployed. And thought, you know what, this is it. I'm going to pack up my bags, move back home to LA, live in my parents' basement or something. And yeah, that would be the end of me. And for whatever reason, I kept chugging. I kept looking for work. And little by little, I started meeting new people, getting introduced to other designers, other people in my field. And pretty quickly I started finding some clients. And at first those clients were sparse and few, far and few between. But eventually those clients became more regular. And after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, some of those clients became my regular clients. And after this second period of being basically unemployed and really sad, I felt like I was making some progress again. And I had those clients for a while, but I still was just barely scraping by. I was working 20, 30, or 40 hours a week. And it took me time to really build my work until a place where I was living comfortably or living really well at all. And it took me about 1.5 years before I ever made like a livable salary in San Francisco or the Bay Area at all. And it was at this point finally where I was like, phew, I made it. I felt a moment of calm for once, and I thought maybe this would work. And soon clients came to me with more work, and more clients came. And I realized this wasn't enough. I realized that for all this time that I'd been struggling, finally I was making things work. And I needed to make a change. And it was at this moment that I was starting to ask myself, do I start to grow this business? Do I focus on this freelance work that was basically just to help get me out of unemployment? Or do I maybe start looking for another job? And I took a critical look at myself and just realized that like 2 years of freelancing work, this time working at a startup, time working at Sony, I really just missed working with other designers. And that was like the one thing that was kind of lacking in my life. And it was just super fortunate that on that same day that I'm making this decision, a recruiter from Facebook called me. And I didn't think anything of it. I had been rejected from Facebook 3 or 4 times before. I'd interviewed at places like Apple and Google and was very cynical about ever having any prospect of working there. But I decided to entertain the idea. Ended up working, and a few months later, I started my first day at Facebook. At this point, I was probably 3 or 4 years into my career. Some of my friends who had graduated college right after me had instantly got into companies like this, and I just felt myself struggling, going through this circle for years. And this was the first moment where even like some of my friends or family thought that I'd actually been successful. I remember this was the first month in my life where my dad didn't call me asking me if I needed a loan for the month. Not that I had needed it before, but it wasn't until this moment that he thought that I was actually doing anything with my life. And sadly, looking back, I realized like that's almost how I felt. I realized that all this time I had been accumulating accomplishments and achievements and making things on my own, but it felt like I hadn't been making any forward progress. So a few years later, let's jump ahead, and now I'm giving a talk about something I'm completely unqualified for and feeling lots of imposter syndrome, despite this weird graph, which is strangely validating and helps me feel like maybe I've accomplished something. So also to my mom, I love you, but hopefully you understand why I'm not a doctor. All this is just to say that there's no real set path. You can talk to 100 different designers and you'll get 100 different stories. And everyone has their own accomplishments, their own low moments, their own moments where they thought that they were going to make it, their own moments where they failed. And that's all part of the story. If you feel like you have moments of imposter syndrome, know that that's the way that we all feel, and we all work to overcome those feelings at some point. But sometimes you need to just stay through it. So that's enough about me. What are we going to talk about today? The first thing I'd love to talk about is how to frame a problem and how you can make your work look good for our portfolio or for our presentation. And second, I'd love to talk to you about how we do this at Facebook. The way that I laid this out, it seems like I would talk about one and then the other, but really I'm just going to talk about these at the same time, and you'll see what I mean. So first, some important context, just talking about my work and my workplace. Facebook tends to be a very data-driven place, which is sometimes to our detriment. Everyone thinks my work looks like this, a series of graphs and us just making decisions, and y'all are just numbers. But in reality, design is as much about the qualitative, creative thinking as it is the quantitative decision-making. And one of the things we like to do at my work specifically are set 50-50 goals. So we like to set goals where we imagine that we'll only ever achieve 50% of what we set out to do. For today's sake, I would love to teach you all how to be excellent speakers, how to be representatives and advocates for your own work, and to help give you the self-confidence that you need and you want. But ideally, I'll probably only achieve half of that. I'll settle for teaching you the process I like to use, and hopefully some parts of it will resonate for you. So, what goes into a good portfolio piece? I'm going to throw a bunch of things at you. You don't need to write these down. You know, this seems like it would just pertain to getting a job, but specifically at Facebook and in my work history in the past, I rely on things like a portfolio piece to communicate a lot of things. I use them to document my progress and decision-making with stakeholders. I use them in meetings to help my leadership understand why I made a specific decision and where I need guidance. I also use them to communicate with my managers when I have them, to justify my work, my expertise, to help get a promotion. So know that this is about creating a portfolio piece, but this is really just about how you present your work. And it applies to both. So with that, a Scrabble bag of words for you real quick. As you go through your work, these are the types of things that I'm going to be talking about today. And like I said, this is just a Scrabble bag, like an audience, a process, a role, context, goals, the problem, your solutions. I'll go into most of these, but I want you to know that this is very much a choose your own adventure. These aren't hard and fast rules for how things need to be for you. I want you to look at these and question for yourself what parts of your work fit into these buckets and how you can use this to communicate. And the thing that's missing, the thing that I'm not telling you up front, is that your work revolves around a story. Your job as a designer is not to retell a set of facts. Your job is to tell a story, and that story is your own. I know you're all expecting me to present some sort of hard-hitting portfolio piece, but instead, I'm going to tell you a story. And it's a really simple story. It's a fun story, I think. It's the story of how I made this talk. When Lene asked me to give this talk, I honestly had no idea what to talk about. She said, we have a Denver UX Movies meetup. I want you to give a talk. Are you down? I said, sure. And it took me a while of sitting at my computer, staring mindlessly before I realized that in and of itself, this was a design problem. I realized how better than giving a talk about my work by taking you through how I made this talk. So I set out to document it. I set out to document how I present my work by presenting this talk. And so for each little thing I go through, I'll give you the abstract thing that you should remember, the concept you should keep in mind, and then I'll talk you through how I applied it to giving this talk. And hopefully that'll help one of you get a better job someday, and hopefully it'll help me get a better job someday, to be honest. So the first thing we do when we talk about our work, the first thing I do when I talk about my work, is I set an audience. Every good story starts with people fundamentally. And when you're presenting your work, the people you frame your work around mean everything. You first want to start with the people that you're setting out to solve for. And what this does is help avoid solving for the wrong problem or missing your audience entirely. What you want to do in an ideal world is meet your people where you are. And when you communicate your work, you want to set out with the intention that that's what you meant to do. When I came to give this talk today, I knew that I was focused on helping people who might be new to their design careers. I knew that they wanted to understand how to present their work better. I also know that people who are in this group might not be designers with 10 or 20 years of experience or people who are already doing this. So I can focus on the fundamentals. I don't need to focus on the nitty-gritty. Once you have that problem, or once you have that audience, it's really important to set a clear set of problems. The thing to remember when you're starting your work, but also when you're presenting your work, is you're not a superhero. Your job isn't to solve for everything all at once. Sometimes the best designs set out to solve one thing and just do that one thing really well. So when you can focus your problems down and you can communicate those problems well, you help keep your work focused around specific pain points that you're looking to alleviate. This also doubles to help keep your solutions grounded in a set of clear principles you define early on. And again, this is something that you can carry through when you're starting your design process as much as when you're communicating it at the end. Today, I gave myself 3 potential problems I wanted to discuss. 1, newbies like me or you are at a disadvantage with information. Sometimes there's just far too much of it in the world. Sometimes there's not enough guidance on what is or isn't important when it comes to presenting your work or talking about your work. 2, abstract advice and tips can be hard to contextualize. It's hard to apply that to my unique experience, to my job, to my workplace. And 3, when I'm learning, gatekeepers might discourage honesty to protect their privilege. Someone who is in a position of power, they're a fancy designer at a fancy company, or they've built some cool product that you're envious of. they might not actually want other people to get to the position that they're in. Unfortunately, this is like the sad state of the world, that sometimes gatekeepers do exist, and sometimes they perpetuate information that isn't completely honest or true because they want to keep people away from their positions of power. So one thing I wanted to address is that problem specifically, and make sure that when I'm talking about my work, I talk about myself honestly. That's why I gave you this little spiel about my path and how I got here. I talked about myself a little bit vulnerably to help you understand that I'm trying to communicate that honestly. And now that you've got a compelling set of problems and a group of people that those problems are scoped around, it's time to be honest about the constraints you have. This is something we forget about sometimes, that sometimes we have something around us that's preventing us from doing our best work. Let's say you're building the next Venmo. Early on in starting a company like Venmo, you might not have all of the fancy tooling and processes that you have later on. You might be starting a company where people can transfer money from one person to the next automatically, but have no payment processor that can actually do that work for you. Your constraint might be that you have to manually transfer the money from people's accounts, one to the other, and maybe that influences the work that you do. Crafty solutions are nothing to be ashamed of, and it's good to be honest about them. It's always good to present those challenges or obstacles, because being transparent helps set the context and the expectations for, again, why you did the work you did. My constraints today are simple. I only have 30 or 60 minutes to talk to you all. I can't be in person to communicate this well, even though I love body language. If you could see me, I'm dancing right now. Also, interacting over Zoom is just awkward. So how do I make this talk a little bit more lighthearted and more visual? Being transparent about my constraints helps you understand why I made decisions the way I made them. Because this talk is over Zoom, I'm over-indexing on being funny or levity. This is all intentional, and hopefully I'm being funny. And next up, an unpopular opinion. Early on in our careers, we relish in showing our process. We're told to show our research, to show our brainstorms, to show our whiteboards. And I see this in earlier designers' portfolios and their pieces. They love talking about their Post-it notes. They love showing me the clusters that they've made. We think that the process is what makes us good designers, when really it's the decisions that we made and how we got there that do. Your Post-it notes are boring, but your decisions are not. Until you've set that context, until you've explained the constraints, the problems, the people, you haven't framed the work and why you're solving for it. And once you've framed all of those things, you can walk through your decision-making. You can walk through your trade-offs. You can walk through the path your solutions took you down. Remember, all of this always comes back down to a story. My story is, I know that today I might have a captive audience of newer designers. I know that I didn't have much in the way of resources or physical space to work with. Instead of explaining to you that I brainstormed, I'm going to explain what I brainstormed and why. Originally, when Lene came up to me, I thought about designing and walking through a case study of one of my products, something I did at Facebook, something that you guys might think is cool. The pros to this approach are, maybe it gives you some insights into Facebook, because maybe Facebook is cool to you. It's rooted in reality, so it's gonna help you understand how to approach your work with it. And also I can do this virtually, I don't need to be in person. The cons though are that it's really hard to gain insight on my internal work at Facebook without internal context as to what I did and why, and what the decisions we made beforehand. And I don't have another 30 minutes to sit here and explain that to you. As much as you all think a company might be cool, Facebook isn't really that cool of a place to work with after all. And also, my design work just isn't easily generalizable for other designers. So me presenting my own work doesn't really help you in any meaningful way. You could probably just go read it on your own and gain your own insights. And finally, most importantly, Zoom things suck. So I tossed out this idea. And Lene and I kept talking and messaging each other. And we thought, why don't we explore doing interactive exercise? What if we all learn something together and design something together and brainstorm something together from scratch? We would sit here over Zoom. It would be really productive. It would be really fun. And it seemed great. I mean, Lene was really excited about it. She was excited about doing something interactive. Interactive things are really engaging. And personally, I learn by doing things. I don't learn by watching. But the cons seem to outweigh the pros. Fundamentally, I'm kind of lazy. Fundamentally, making people volunteer on Zoom really sucks. I know what it feels like being on the other side of the screen. And also personally, I think that I'm a better public speaker than I am an online facilitator. And finally, and most importantly, Zoom things suck. So, another idea. we brainstormed me presenting my work and presenting how I present my work and what I show, not just the content, but the actual structure. And this was a really interesting idea. We realized that fundamentally, again, I am lazy, but I'm a much better public speaker than I am an online facilitator. And in this case, Zoom things suck, but maybe we can work that to our advantage. The cons, really, there are none. Me talking about my work, I don't know, maybe you won't find this interesting, maybe I'll fail. But honestly, I'm always worried about that. I have imposter syndrome just making this deck. And so talking about my work, however weird it is, could be a fun way to get over that. So I had this aha moment that this idea of talking about my work seemed to show the most promise. And so I set off. I went into my design cave and I really got hard at work. You know, I stewed on it for a few days with my whiteboard and my pen in my hand. And I thought really hard about potential design solutions. And I came up with prototypes that I showed Lene. And I thought, you know, what if I give this talk on the process of making this talk? And I thought to myself, boy, wouldn't that be meta? And everyone loves meta. So here I am. Once I've walked through the solutions, which I just did, hopefully, I can talk about my results. And this is something that I want y'all to take with you too. In reality, this is the real meat that most people are missing in their work. Showing your process is great. Even showing your solutions is wonderful. But if you can talk about the impact that your work made, that's the real meat and potatoes of this. When it's possible, you want to present your findings, your results, how you made a difference, when you can measure it or when you can tell. Typically at Facebook, this is where we illustrate if our solutions worked, how they map back to the original problems we set out to solve, the people that we were solving for, the context we were solving for, the constraints we had, which of our hypotheses were validated. When I started this talk, I was thinking about three things primarily. I was thinking about there being too much information in the world. I was thinking about how my ideas could be too abstract. I thought about how gatekeepers suck in my personal experience. And so I thought about how I could solve for those things, and I kept my solutions grounded in those problems. To combat there being too much information, I tried to make these slides as simplistic and as human as I could to fix the abstract problem. Rather than like talk about something in abstract, what if I just showed you how I made this? And if gatekeepers suck, then what about if I'm just honest about my own process? If I just break down the walls of my experience, maybe I'll seem like less of a gatekeeper potentially. At the end of the day, presenting your work and packaging it for others feels scary. Showing folks your work is scary, but it's not hard. My aim in talking about this is to demonstrate that you can feel confident even amidst that fear. At Facebook, we stay pretty close to the scientific method, so how we present our work and even how we go through our work is relatively simple. We come up with a hypothesis, we explore methods, we iterate based on findings. It's generally the scientific method. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in that we forget that it's easy to communicate that too if we just sit down and try. The thing that's important in the scientific method is not always just making the hypothesis, but it's testing that hypothesis and seeing if it's true. So today I'm gonna test my hypothesis. I'm gonna test my findings, get off my high horse. I'm gonna stop reading these notes on my screen, look at your faces in the Zoom window, and we're gonna do that audience participation again. So this time I want you to look again and think, answer one of three ways. I'd love for you to wiggle your hands if you still feel a little bit stuck, if this hasn't helped you improve things much. I'd love for you to give me 1 or 2 thumbs up if you're feeling more confident as a result of any part of the story I just told you. And if you're still drowning, then that's fine, Hunter. You can still be drowning. That's okay. And I'd love to see just kind of how this resonates with y'all. Hunter's not drowning anymore. We saved him. That makes me so happy. If only Hunter wasn't muted so I could hear Hunter laughing. So,
sorry.
Oh, good.
Nice, man. Great job so far.
So yeah, this isn't a real quantitative look at how things are done. But the important thing I want to leave you with is that it's important to make use of gut calls like the one I made to make this talk. to understand if you're truly serving the people you're designing for. It's important to put those gut calls out in the wild and test them and talk about the results of that gut call. You know, the worst thing you can do is have a good idea and not show other people it. So I can go back to my slides. The final thing that I want to leave you with is reflections. One of the things that we stress a lot in my work is reflecting on what you could have done differently. And honestly, being self-aware is one of my favorite design skills personally. I think being self-aware helps you be critical, not just of the things that you're building, but of yourself, of the biases you have, the assumptions you hold, and how you can do things differently. You know, when you're building something, you're designing something, maybe your first solution misses something really important. Maybe you left out really important accessibility features, and only after launching a product, you realize that, hey, we had millions of people or hundreds of people or tens of people who are vision impaired. We should have solved for those people. Addressing those changes or those gaps when you're presenting your work helps demonstrate to the people on the other side of your presentation that you can see beyond your own assumptions or your own beliefs about what's right, that you can critique your own progress. You open the door for those people to be able to critique your work too, and not just criticize it. It's also really good to just document what you could do the next time around, what you could do better. Looking at this presentation, you know, maybe I could have shown you a real project. Maybe I could have been more funny. Maybe I could have used a different font. You know, maybe any of these things. The important thing is not that woulda, shoulda, coulda feeling. The important thing is that I have something I can look at next time. Next time I want to give this talk, next time I want to present my work, I have things I can learn from and I can demonstrate some growth to myself and to others. At Facebook, we have this really trite aphorism that the journey is only 1% finished. And we have this plastered over everything at work. And I believe that. I believe, you know, I gave this talk, but that doesn't mean that I'm done with this. Maybe I iterate on this and I learn for the next time and I do it a little bit better. Maybe I would have thought to talk less and leave more room for questions. Maybe instead of Zoom, I would have told us all to meet in the park somewhere. The last thing I'd love to do is hear from you. I'd love to turn this back on y'all and see what I could have done differently, how I could learn from this experience, and what I can incorporate into my next design. How can I make this more informative, more entertaining, more straightforward? And one of the things I'd love to do is call on a few people at random, if that's okay, and get your feedback. So I'm gonna pick 4 people. I'll just limit it to whoever I can see on camera because I assume you're not camera shy. And if you'd be okay, just tell me four things that, or one thing I could have done differently. So let's go with Meng Ming. I'd love to call you out if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. So one thing I've been wondering, not necessarily as feedback, but just with my own case study. So you say that we shouldn't be showing all parts of our process. Then I guess, sorry, I'm still forming the question in my mind, but.
I meant to put you on the spot, but I also didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so you say not to show the whole process. How do you identify which decisions are important enough to show on your portfolio? Because recruiters still have a limited amount of time to read your portfolio. And you also mentioned that when you made these slides that you wanted to make it as human and simplistic as possible. But when you're showing recruiters, because I'm a student, so I've never interacted with recruiters before, would they be more interested in seeing a more human and simplistic case study, or would they be interested in seeing a more data-driven, more quantitative approach?
So I think it comes down to what you're trying to communicate. If your decision-making was data-driven and quantitative, you want to illustrate that. Fundamentally, you want to show someone that, like, hey, this was a big part of my work and how I got here. And if you can communicate that to them, that'll help them understand how you got to the end. So my point in talking about process was not that like you shouldn't talk about your process at all or that it's meaningless, but more that like the focus on process for showing like a picture of, you know, a whiteboard or Post-its or whatever, it doesn't really do you any service. If you can say like, hey, I did this research study and the research study validated this design and 76% of these people thought that my design was great, that's great because it helps add fodder to why you did the thing you did and why you carried forward. The thing that I see for a lot of people, especially newer designers, we can all be like really guilty of this, is we go out there and we have a cool idea, but we never figure out a way to validate it. And part of your process should be validating and refining your ideas and finding some signal for how you should move forward. And if you're moving forward without any intentionality, you're basically just like guessing. And that can be a really clear sign to someone that maybe you didn't know how to move forward. Maybe you didn't know where to go from here. Maybe you didn't, there wasn't enough guidance on the problem or the project or the audience or whatever.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's go to Vivian, because I like your background.
Oh, shit.
I'll repeat for you too, just to make it easier. I'd love one piece of thing I could have done differently to make this presentation better for you.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to cuss. I guess I was like, wait, and there's no way he's gonna call on me. And then damn, you call my name. So thing is, I'm similar to Meng earlier too. I'm not technically in the real work environment yet, so I'm still a student finishing up, and I am still having problem or trouble, like even creating the case study versus like portfolio. So I have a mentor that we kind of discussed about this too. He kind of wanted me to focus on the case study. It's something that like you want to present like as if I was to present it towards the like let's say in an interview. So just show my data only. And then when I take a look at the samples of portfolio online, dribbles everywhere, like good sample one. So they're much more precise, and they only it looks really slick and cool almost. And then when I compare it mine, it's like I think I have trouble with like keep always writing too much information.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess earlier, like I'm still feeling a little drowning, even after your talk, because
No,
like
you want to know that.
yeah, because I guess I don't know where to even begin for like a good one versus like a bad one, because I've never really had an experience on a good one or a bad one yet.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hard things is just knowing how much to communicate or how little. I think when you want to prove yourself, you tend to like write and you pour your heart out into your portfolio and then you look at it. Like in my experience, I would look at my portfolio a few years ago, even like when I was applying for this job, the last time I rewrote my portfolio, and like each case study was like 3,000 words long. And I would send it to my friends to edit it and they're like, Keon, I'm not going to read this. This is like an essay. I'm not going to read like a formal essay on why you designed this stupid wireframe. Just like, please stop. And
Like,
yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. Like what typically what's the kind of questions in general when you write the portfolio that you're trying to, I guess, answer or try to gather it? Because at the end of the day, some even though on different topics, portfolios still somehow follow a certain format, right? Is there like certain questions that we should kind of try to hit and answer to make sure that we get all the information needed on the portfolio?
Totally. Yeah, and I think the best answer I can give you is just like, I tried to lay out the fundamental questions that I think you should be answering for yourself in each portfolio piece. Like you should look at your work and ask yourself, like, what was your goal? What did you set out to achieve? Were there any metrics with that? Who are the people you are solving for? Why are those the people you're solving for? What is the problem those people are having? Why are they having the problem? And it's like, once you set out that context, those can each be like a sentence. They don't have to be a paragraph. They don't have to be a case study in and of themselves. Like you don't even have to justify your work, if that makes sense. Sometimes just putting it out there simply, which is saying like, this is my audience. This is the problem they're having. That's enough context to help someone anchor an understanding of your portfolio, if that makes sense. So I can gladly share these slides and maybe like put them in a more simplified way too. Or just like I think there's like 5 or 6 or 7 questions fundamentally that from my work at Facebook, they're like the 5 or 6 or 7 questions we ask ourselves and the 5 or 6 or 7 questions we want answered to be able to present our work well.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Christina's got a question.
I have a resource that I can put in the chat, but it's disabled.
Oh yeah, go for it. Also, sorry that I didn't see your questions in the chat. I was very focused on my slides and didn't have the chat open.
So everyone's asking about, you know, portfolio help, and I listened to a really good podcast that I found helpful for putting my own portfolio together. So maybe others will as well.
Yeah.
It kind of goes over everything of potentially how to structure it. And if you have any real jobs like dealing with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements and stuff like that. So that's it. You can also get it on like iTunes and all of those other kinds of things too. So
Cool.
I guess I'll put the title in too, but yeah.
That's cool. I'll ask for 1 or 2 more pieces of feedback just because I think this is fun. How about you, Hunter? You were laughing a bunch. Do you have any thoughts?
All right. What's up, man?
I know.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, you know, as you were going through this process and everything, and you're kind of going through like your personal background and some of the experiences that you've had, like a lot of those milestones that you hit were pretty like emotional, and I'm sure you had a lot of information from different experiences that, you know, I guess it just required a lot of you. So as you start to put together like a portfolio or case studies, how much of that can you put into it? How much of your authentic self can you put into those kinds of things and this kind of work that you put in? I'm sure that was hard. And how would you recommend us going about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know what? I honestly don't know that I have a good answer for you. I think like sadly we're still in this place where our like professional lives are a bit splintered from our personal lives. And there are some workplaces in my life where I felt like I could be my authentic self, and very many others where I didn't. And many others where like that vulnerability and that sign of like something personal is actually not welcomed and might be discouraged. I don't know. I think you've got to find the balance. I think it's important to be honest. There's always like this trade-off in my head. It's important to be honest about who you are. But when it comes to your portfolio, your case studies, presenting your work, you have to remember that like the outcome is hopefully selling your work, selling your process, selling your solutions, and like almost marketing yourself. And that sounds very like vapid and empty, but that's like the real thing. Like if I'm going out and getting a job, my goal is not to hope that like a recruiter and the hiring manager get to know me that personally, as much as it is that they get help hire me. And like maybe afterwards that relationship grows and starts to build. But one of the things I found really tricky when I was starting is like, when I was very early on in my career, I was all about just like putting a spin on my work and making myself sound great. And hiring managers always saw through it. Like the first time I interviewed at Facebook, I remember I was like 21 or 22. And I tried to like, for lack of a better word, lie about my experiences to make myself sound better than I was. And very quickly, like the hiring manager asked me questions about the process and what I had done, and I didn't have any answers, and like the interview just fell apart. And she was like, hey, she like pulled me aside in a moment of honesty and was like, hey, it's really obvious that you're young in your career. I know that you're trying, but like work on these things a little bit more. She gave me some specific advice, and she was like, come back in a few years when you figure these skills out a little bit more. And very randomly, like 4 years later, she was one of the people who interviewed me at Facebook. And I like told her the story, and I told her about me, and she was like, oh, like I remember that interview. Like it felt really silly. Like I could see through what you were doing, but I also felt bad because you were really young. And so there's always like a little bit of a risk just being super honest also. Like if I talked about me getting fired at my previous job when I was looking for my next job, someone might not hire me because that might look like a bad thing. And so there's always like a little bit of selling yourself and making yourself look good. That's unfortunately just like part of the game, I think. I think you have to find out how to make yourself look good. And then once you kind of have an in with people, there's always a good opportunity to be honest and be transparent about yourself. And, you know, like when you're getting hired for a job, that's a good time if you're going through something really personal, something really emotional, you have like a family member you need to take care of, something intense going on in your life, that's when someone is like capable of accommodating you. It's not when like you're in their pipeline to get hired, because that might just like turn them off you altogether, unfortunately.
Definitely. Thank you. You answered that really well, actually. Just being honest about where you're at with everything, but also like, you know, kind of owning where you're at with things too. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah, you got it. I know Sunny had another, one last thing he wanted to mention. Sunny, you want to jump on?
Yeah, hi, Johan. It was a great talk. I could relate with most of the stuff you said. Only thing is, I'm about to graduate and I'm jobless as well. And, you know, I'm into research. My only thing is I have built my portfolio a lot of times, but I didn't like it and I killed it.
Yep.
So it's still not live. So what do you have for me? Like, I want my portfolio to be perfect. I agree, no project is perfect. It's work in progress, but, you know, I just want to take the first step, I guess.
I think the first step is, I don't know. I think it's always tricky. Like we get in these cycles of spending all this time rewriting our portfolios or working on our portfolios, and then you get really upset because you've looked at them for so long that you don't want to look at them anymore, and then you destroy them. And like every time you get a job, like you look for a new job, you have to do this whole thing all over again. It feels very pointless, to be honest. The best advice I can give you is don't look at it as this like monolithic big thing in front of you. Find like the small next step that you can take that'll make you feel like you made some progress. Like it might be as easy as like, today I'm going to figure out what are the top 2 or 3 things I'm most proud of. Like I don't need to show every single thing in my portfolio because no one has time to read it. So pick like the 2 or 3 things and like gather maybe the design work that you've done or any work that you've done. And maybe tomorrow you sit down and for each of those things, you write like 500 words. It doesn't matter what you write, just write 500 words about your experience. And maybe the next day after that, you answer some of like the questions I mentioned. You like write down what your goal is, what your audience is, all these things. I think if each day you can give yourself like a little bit of focus and just like a single thing that you can feel accomplished with, you're more likely to get things done than being like, I've got to get a job and put together a portfolio and present my work. Like all of that is really scary. I get scared. Like I got scared thinking about that. So finding ways to make it a little bit more tangible will really help. And I see that there's questions in the chat too, and I can go back and answer all of these because I got plenty of time.
Yeah, I've been kind of keeping track of the chat questions for you. If you want me to start asking those right about now, is that good? Or do you have anything else?
Yeah, I guess like the final thing I'll leave you guys with before I take questions. Here, I'll scooch out of the way again because it's fun to do this.
I'm sorry, I just have one more thing to add, Juan.
Yeah, sure.
Like you said, you made a transition into industry. You were doing some freelance work, but you felt like you were successful.
Yeah.
But you said the others couldn't credit it. So why did you move into industry? You know, when you were doing freelance work, you had the control of what to design. But when you move to a company, do you still have the control of what you want to work on? Or,
yeah.
You know?
The real honest answer I can give you is when I was freelancing, I was going through like one of the more emotionally difficult times in my life, being in like a very intense relationship. Just like personally being in like a very depressive period of my life. And those like 2 years that I was freelancing were not anything I was planning on. It was like literally just a means for me to make my rent. And eventually it snowballed into like, oh, I'm making money, I should keep doing this. And I was like trying to chase that money as a means of making myself more comfortable. And by the time I got to a place where I was like making what would otherwise be like a salary at a job, I was just like so exhausted and so spent. And just so lonely. Like I was working by myself every day as a designer. I wasn't working with a design team. I was working with people who didn't understand design and like teaching them how to design. And yeah, I think to be perfectly honest, it was just like a very emotionally turbulent time in my life. And I was looking for something to give me a little bit more stability. And like the allure of freelance work can be really great. Like you could work whatever hours you want from wherever you want, doing whatever you want. But in reality, I was constantly chasing the clients who could pay me the most, rather than focusing on the projects that I was most interested in. And that was just a reality. Like I had bills to pay. If I pick and chose my clients based on what was interesting, I wouldn't have made any money at all. And so I was looking for people who would like help me as much as I could help them. And eventually it just became really exhausting and I think I burnt out. I think I would gladly go back into it. Like it's not something I'm scared of. I was looking for a different experience at that point.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you got it. There's just one last little thing I wanted to leave you with. If you haven't noticed, I'm very into like trite little aphorisms. So I'll leave you with some trite aphorisms. I showed you this little like squiggly line at the beginning, and we've certainly talked about it a bunch right now. The thing I want to leave you with is that like life is really short. You really should just do whatever you want. And if design is the thing that makes you happy, then like please by all means go do design. But just don't forget that like communicating your design work is your design work. This is something that like no one ever taught me. I like made this point about sketches and post-its and wireframes and whatever. Like all that process is just the means. Even your design work is just the means. But you're also designing like a perception. You're designing how the things you build get perceived, how people use things, how people do things. And if I've done my job, then I've helped you become just like a little bit more mindful of how your work is perceived and how much agency you actually have in that. Like you're not just like a slave to this design process. You are perfectly in control of it and in control of how other people perceive it. And hopefully that means that like you can get the job that you want, you can get the promotion you want, you can help your team or your company or your whatever build the things that you really want. And yeah, just with that, just thank you. I appreciate that you all took the time to listen to me. I'm definitely not qualified for any of this. I'm happy to take any questions you have and we'll go back in the chat.
All right, I got some questions. I wrote some down from earlier. Real quick, what's your degree in?
Oh, I actually meant to say this in the beginning and I totally forgot. My degree is in human-computer interaction, which I have a fun story about, but it was like totally a fluke that I ended up doing that.
Cool. We actually have someone in the chat that's from Sony too, so she kind of answered that, but I thought that was cool that we have a Sony person here. Next up, so when do you know when someone is gatekeeping? Are there any red flags we should be looking for?
That is a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that there's just some people who are more focused on like this kind of self-congratulatory, like look at what I did, more than they are uplifting other people and like helping them get to where they are. Again, like I made a point out of talking about this like personal journey I had, because even when I'm looking for a job and we talk about those things, I think people are very quick to like create these, once they're successful, they're quick to act like there was a shortcut to their success. And it's really easy to spot those people. Like it's really easy to see the person who was actually working for like years and years and years to get where they are, act like, oh, this happened like out of thin air. Like I just made this app or this product and it was instantly successful. And anyone who acts like that and doesn't have like any sort of struggle, in my eyes, I'm always really skeptical of, because I'm like, no one I know didn't work hard to get to where they are. Like all of us start with our own relative amounts of privilege and things in our way. But you have to like work hard to keep at it. The people who don't work hard kind of get filtered out naturally, hopefully.
Sense. Cool. I have a question here from RJ Whitaker. He says, I have a question. Because of all my work as a student is in Career Foundry, I feel self-conscious about not having any real world business experience. How can I highlight my process knowing I don't have actual work experience?
Give it to me one more time. Just want to make sure I understood that well.
Basically, he's asking about like how to show your work if it's not real world experience. So like if he has projects from school, maybe passion projects.
Oh.
How do you highlight your process knowing that that's not real?
This is one of my favorite places that I fucked up on personally, and pardon my French. When I was starting work, I was like so hyper focused on needing to show real work all the time. And one of like the huge things I missed was that like the best way to show that you're motivated and that you care about these things and that you know something is to work on something that you're personally motivated by. And if you have like these side projects that you're working on that aren't driven by like you needing to make money or because of a job or because of someone else, like those are the things you should show people. In almost every hiring situation I've been in, the people who are like passionate about something, however small and meaningless, are the people who stand out way more than someone who has like a cool real world experience. If only because that kind of demonstrates the soft skill of like, you're autonomous, you're motivated by yourself. You don't need like me or someone else to give you a direction in order to execute well. And that's like that's a really hard skill. I don't have that skill sometimes. I sometimes am just like sitting around waiting for someone to tell me what to do. And other times I'm like kick my ass into gear and do things. So I wouldn't be limited by not having like real world experience. Lean on that. Talk about why you do that and why it's important to you and what the outcomes are.
Love it. I agree. Okay, next question. You talk about showing how your product makes a difference in people's lives. What if your work is not yet at that point?
So again, I tried to make reference to this, but I kind of went through it really quickly. I think this is as much a thing that you can use when you're starting work as much as when you're presenting it. Like I talked about presenting work because I thought it would be the most accessible thing for all of you, but this is actually the process I use to start my work. I ask myself all these questions, and this is how I figure out what I need to work on. Is if I'm missing the answer to any of these questions, then it's pretty immediate what I need to get started on. And anytime like someone at my office, like we start a project, for a 6-month period or whatever, and I'm working on something and it dawns on me that like, oh, we don't actually have like a set of people we're designing for, then I just like stop all the work and go look for that answer. So like Facebook specifically, we have this concept called like a project brief or a design brief, where we document this stuff up front. And so like when it comes time to presenting your work, you actually already have like the decisions you made and the answers and the reasoning. You just have to go back and reference it. Which makes me realize I can make my portfolio tonight if I really wanted to. I don't know why I've been waiting.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to redoing mine. But I need some work too. Okay, much of the work I'm currently doing is protected by an NDA. How do I show my skills while only showing a little of my work?
Oh, that's also a good question. We end up having a lot of NDAs for our work. I think the common knowledge in our industry is that so long as you are like upfront about your work being under NDA, you can present it in an interview. Again, like take this with a grain of salt because your workplace might be different. But generally, an NDA doesn't prevent you from showing your work. It just prevents you from showing it publicly. So what a lot of people do is put like a password on their portfolio pieces that have an NDA. And then when an employer reaches out for an interview, they just respond up front. Say like, hey, this one piece is under NDA. Here's the password. You can access it, but please don't share it. That's all. Like no one's going to go around sharing my portfolio piece with the rest of the world. Like there's really no incentive to do so.
Yeah, that's why I keep hearing to do. It's good advice. Another question, is it better to focus on projects? Is it better to focus your projects on breadth or depth?
To focus an individual project, I assume.
No, it's a collection of projects. So let's say, for example, that, I've worked on like hardware things and software things and apps and that sort of thing. Is it better to say like, well, most of the work is, web-based or app-based, so I'm just going to show those projects, or is it better to have a variety?
Okay. This comes down to a few things in my opinion. And again, my opinion. You're always trying to tell the story about yourself. That story can change depending on your context. So if you're applying for a job, or you're starting to look for jobs and you're really excited about working about something in the web space, you might start to tailor your portfolio or your pieces towards that and not show breadth in all these other places if it doesn't help you communicate that one part of your story. So I think it's really good to look at yourself critically and look at like, what are the experiences I have? And then what are the experiences I'm trying to get? And kind of tailor your story and your portfolio to fit that as much as possible. But again, it has to do with, I think it has to do with communicating that story however you see fit. So you're designing the perception of yourself. If you show someone that you can do like 10 things, but you haven't done any of, it's hard to tell which one of those you've done really well. People might pass you over for the opportunities in any one of those positions because they don't have a specific example to point to. But if you can give them, like for instance, I was recently trying to go work on like a VR project at Facebook, and I have no VR or 3D experience. And I was like, oh, it's Facebook. Like, it'll be easy. I could just find a friend who works there and like help get myself on one of these projects. And like time after time after time, the managers were just like, well, like, it's great, you have all this other experience, but like, you don't have any VR experience. So like, I'm not gonna spend my time considering you until you have that experience. And it didn't matter that I showed breadth in all these other places. What they were looking for in that scenario was depth. But again, that story changes. It always depends on what you're trying to sell yourself as. Like earlier on in my career, I was trying to show breadth and not depth because I wanted to be flexible and not pigeonhole myself into one place. But now that I'm a little bit later, I might be a little bit more focused on the type of work I want. And so I might go after depth in one area or one theme of things to help me get there.
Right, another question about gatekeepers. So how did you navigate gatekeepers in your experience, maybe at Facebook or somewhere else? Did your creativity make them uncomfortable? And was that creativity ultimately what got you the job at Facebook?
That's a very good question. I think that gatekeeping can just like get in your way. I don't know that I have like a good specific example. As much as it's just like, there were plenty of times where I could have used someone's help. And I think they saw like a new, or actually, you know what, a good example of this is any typical team, you're gonna have like senior people and more junior people. The worst thing I've seen in my opinion is when those like senior designers or senior team members kind of look down on those younger designers because they're younger, because they might be like more naive or more inexperienced. When in reality, to me, like that's one of the coolest aspects of being new is you're new to things. Like you have a different perspective and that's valuable. And so I frequently look at the younger people on my teams and try and like ask them for help, ask them for advice. I had a really funny experience. Actually, now that I think about it, I had a funny experience when I was back at Sony, where one of like the heads of our department, one of like the engineering heads, was trying to convince his engineers to build this new product. And it was just like some funny little widget or bauble that he wanted on like the PCs that we were making. And no one could really justify why this thing existed, but everyone was like, oh, Tony wants it, so like we should just go build it. And I like kind of I got brought into these meetings just because my like manager thought it would be cool for me to watch. And my very first day, I was like, why are we making this? Like, this doesn't solve any problem for anyone. Like, this seems cool, but no one's gonna use this. Like, it's not usable, it's not interesting, it's not fun. And the manager was just like, oh, you know, this thing and that thing. And I had this idea when I was sleeping and it's such a cool idea and I would use it every day. And I was like, that's great, like you would use it. Maybe someone else in this room would use it, but like, I don't think 1,000 people buying a Sony computer are gonna use it. And this meeting room went silent and like they continued on. And my manager pulled me aside afterwards and was just like, hey, like my boss told me to tell you that like you can never do that ever again. Like you can never speak out of line like that. Like that was like the director of this department and like you're not in a place to question him. You're just our intern. And that was kind of like the moment it clicked to me. I was like, oh, like to your point, it was challenging to have me bring up the fact that they could be wrong. And I've done that plenty of times in my career since. And you know, to varying levels of success. Like sometimes people respond to that. Sometimes people get really angry, and to me that's just like almost like a personal sign of some sort of like insecurity of like someone isn't that confident in their decision making or their thought process. They're going to defend it by any means necessary and not like back down from it. And like that's maybe that's the type of gatekeeping I'm referring to more, is like there is always going to be someone who's going to try and put you in your place. And no one should be able to do that to you. Like you shouldn't let yourself be put in that place in the first place.
I totally hear that. In one of my last jobs, I was always told that I was intimidating every time I had an opinion. So I totally get that. It's like really frustrating when people are insecure. I think that's really what it is. There's a lot of insecurity there. They don't want someone like younger telling them, you know, something. So there's that company politics you have to deal with.
Yeah, always.
Right. Some tips on freelancing for a newer UX designer.
Lots of tips, I guess. I mean, I think one of them is always set your rates higher than you think. Like you are fundamentally worth a lot more money than you think. And when I started, I kind of just like took the best common knowledge of like what one of my friends told me they were making And it didn't dawn on me until like a year and a half into freelancing that I could just set my rate at whatever I wanted, and like the rate that I set affected my perception as much as my work. It was this very weird relationship I didn't understand at first. I was like, oh, if I set my rate too high, it's like supply and demand. There's no one who's going to want me, so no one's going to pay me. But I realized that like the more experience I got and the more I could actually communicate my work, that's probably the most important thing. It became a lot easier to sell myself in these situations, and it became a lot easier to justify why I was raising, like why my rate was higher than the next designer. And naturally that would like filter people out, but it also filtered people out for my sake. Like it meant that I wouldn't find people who might take advantage of me or my time otherwise. And it made my time more valuable, which is always a benefit for you as a designer, I think.
It's a really great tip. I'm struggling with that as well on what to charge. So,
yeah. The other thing I'll tell you, because I see JPF, I don't know your name, but you mentioned that you think it would be exhausting having your own business in the past. I mean, I think given the current context, like freelancing is a great way to get started if you can find the work. But like the one thing that no one really tells you is that freelancing by itself is its own job. Like running your own business, however you want to structure it, is a job. When I was working, 30 hours a week for clients, I was working another 20 hours a week, paying managing my money, making sure I was chasing down payments from my clients, finding new clients, scheduling time with those clients, fielding stupid requests from my clients. Like it wasn't all just work, and the work wasn't factored in all the things I was being paid for. If that makes sense. So if you don't have like the wherewithal for that, if you don't have the energy to like run your own business on top of doing your own work, and you don't have the capacity, then like definitely don't do it. It's really scary and it can really suck. Like it sucked the energy out of me because I wasn't prepared for it. And I think now that I know what I know, I would gladly go back into it. I would just do it with a lot more intention.
All right, next question. During my internship, I was working on small parts of multiple projects. Individually, the stuff I worked on is too small to show on its own, but too disconnected to show as a single project. How would you suggest I show it in my portfolio?
Oh, that's a really good one that pops up a lot. First, and kind of like separately, I would say just like make sure you're bolstering those types of projects and pieces in your portfolio with something that you can explore with a little bit of depth. Like this actually gets to the breadth and depth question in a different way, where like that individual portfolio piece might be your breadth of designs across one domain, but doesn't show you doing any one thing in particular detail. I would just be upfront about that. Just be like, during my internship, I wore, you have to find a way to sell it right. Like I wore lots of hats and I was responsible for lots of little things. So like the places where you can talk about, anything that you led yourself is a good thing to call out. The places where you can call out interesting stories about collaboration with other people is a good place to call out. You can always, hopefully like your design skills will speak for themselves, but if not, you can always use your portfolio pieces to help demonstrate your soft skills, your people skills, show that like you're motivated, show that you are like chasing your own work without being told what to do. All of those things are still things you can communicate in all your portfolio pieces.
All right, I'm coming into UX as a former graphic artist, but after 10 years in another field. How much of my old work should I present in my portfolio?
I think if you're a graphic artist and you're trying to, and now you're a UX designer and you're showing your graphic artwork, I don't know. I think I would be skeptical of putting too much prominence, if at all, into that. Like for a while, I had my photography in my design portfolio, and I thought that it helped me out, but I realize now that it was just like a signal to some people that like I didn't have enough work to show. So just be careful. Like if your graphic art can help show that like you are a good visual designer, I would include it and just like have it be its own one little portfolio piece that talks through your graphic art. But I wouldn't have like individual portfolio pieces necessarily for all of your graphic art.
Yeah, I think someone told me to focus your portfolio on what you want to do. So if you don't want to be like doing those graphic design things like creating logos and things like that, if that's like definitely not what you want to do right now, then maybe don't show that, because you might end up doing that if you're
yeah. The really interesting thing, this took me a long time to understand, but like don't have to show all of your work in the portfolio. There is no like ground truth where someone can go look up the work that you've done other than what you choose to display. So again, like it comes down to the story that you tell. If your story is showing me that you're a graphic artist, I'm gonna start to bucket you that way, whether or not that's what you want me to think. And if you're showing me like mobile designs or some other designs, then I'm gonna start thinking you're that type of designer. And so like again, like the breadth versus depth thing, you wanna show breadth when you don't wanna be pigeonholed in those categories, but you wanna show depth when you do. Like there might be a time where you're looking for something specific, like you're looking to be a UX designer. Focus as much as you can on your UX design.
Cool. All right, so talking about personal projects, anything to avoid, like if it's political or very focused for some minority group?
This sounds very specific. I'm gonna, hopefully I don't butcher your name, but Teopa, do you mind telling me like a kind of specific example of this, and maybe I can give you a more specific answer? And if not, that's fine.
So no, it's not that dramatic. You're making it sound much more dramatic than it is. But because sometimes this is the first time, you know, people are seeing anything that you have. It's not that, you know, I don't want to work at some place that would have a problem with anything that I've worked on, but
Right.
Is it potentially a turnoff if you have something that's like, oh, this was, you know, a makeup thing for Black politically aware women, like, you know, like very specific things. Is that something that you maybe want to like pull back on, not because like it's a problem, but because it's like the first thing when people have no other context about anything you've done?
I think this comes back to like what Hunter was asking, like how do you be your authentic self in these types of contexts? I think if that helps you illustrate who your authentic self is, I don't think that's hurting you. You just have to go into that knowing fully well that like, yeah, you're naturally, like, it's two things. You're gonna naturally turn off some people by having something politically charged or motivated in your portfolio. However you define politically charged or, you know, focused on some minority group. But the real question I'd ask myself is like, would you want to work for any of those people who wouldn't want you to work there because of those things? Those are like equally uncomfortable questions sometimes. But I personally, like, I'm very, I don't know, I'm outspoken. I will put something that I believe in very strongly, even if it might like ruffle some feathers in the way that I show it. Again, it comes down to the story you want to tell.
Are you frozen? Kian, are you still there?
Oh, how many questions do we have left?
Definitely a few.
Up to you, Lene, but we could just give our responses to them and feedback and context from our experiences, and then maybe jump into the breakout rooms. How's that sound?
Yeah, it sounds good. Do you want me to start asking some questions, and if anyone wants to chime in?
Yeah. Let's see what we got.
I lost my place, but I remember there was a question about, so this is one that I always want to know too. So, you know how we always talk about we need to present our ROI, you know, those hard numbers of like success. And like, you know, you started a project and you benchmarked or whatever you did, and then there was success. And so how do you measure that success if it's a small project, you don't have those numbers? How do you show that you were successful?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'll share just my personal thought on that. I see Kian's back, so we can throw it back to him in a minute here.
Oh, cool.
That internet crash.
I think that not all results or impact are necessarily quantifiable. And so one area to look in, if you feel like there aren't any end user quantifiable or business quantifiable results, is potentially to talk about how your work helped your cross-functional teammates. I think especially in interviewing, that's something that comes up a lot as a soft skill that's critical, but maybe we don't pay a lot of attention to it because it's not part of the UX process. But if we talk about how I was able to help my engineering team get unblocked or help my product management team see things from a different perspective, or even how I learn from other people. That can be one way to kind of show results without showing numbers.
So Keon's back, or where is
Back.
he? Are you back?
Yeah, sorry. I thought you guys froze. It turned out I froze.
No worries. Well, Ryan answered one question for you, so we're still plugging along here. I think we have a few more. Okay, so one question. How do I keep my portfolio precise and still address the important aspects? A lot of times when I try to cover the problem, constraints, research methods, synthesis, decisions taken, etc., the project becomes very long to read through.
Yeah, like I said, I went through this exact same problem. I think the only like kind of sad answer I can give you is just like the more you practice communicating your work, the more you get an intuition for what's important and what's not. The best thing you can do, I think, early on is just be a really ruthless editor. You know, I interview people a ton, and I don't have time to read like a 1,000-word case study as much as I want to. Like very often I want to go to a designer's page and like pour over their work, but I just don't have the time for it. Like I'm jumping, the reality of my work is I'm going from meeting to meeting. I have an interview in the middle of 2 or 3 meetings. I have like 10 minutes to look at their portfolio before I jump in. So like, I'm really just coming on, making sure there's like some decent signal that this person knows what they're doing and is not a complete fraud. And then that like they're touching on some of the important points that show me that they're capable of the design work. I don't necessarily need to know like every single detail. Like I said, I just need to know that they're like thinking about their problem. They're intentional about solving those problems. They've like done some work to move from this like generative big space to something refined and simple. And then that they can back it up, and then they can tell me honestly, sometimes the most important thing is like, did you have a goal? Did you achieve the goal? If not, what would you do next time to get that goal? That's like really all I need most of the time.
Cool. Okay, this is Facebook specific. So when you join Facebook, how much of your learning is on the job and how much is expected to be known before joining?
Ooh, that's a good question. You definitely need to know before you join. I think for design, like in general, I didn't actually need to know anything before starting. I think like I went to school and we did like human-computer interaction, and we had all these like studio classes, and we did design exercises, and we learned how to do quantitative research and qualitative research and contextual inquiry, and like I whiteboarded the hell out of my school years. And I didn't need to know any of that. Like my first day working at Sony or any job after that, as long as I had like a passion for, I don't know, human psychology to some small degree, and I had access to the internet, like I could have figured out how to do all my work within 1 month. And actually like all of the design work I did after school had almost no bearing on what I learned in school. Like the fundamentals helped me. They gave me like something to anchor my work on, but they didn't teach me any of the skills I need for my job. And like surely at Facebook, the reason why I didn't get the job those first 3 or 4 times is like, I didn't have the capacity for the skills that they needed when I needed to start. And I, like at first I was really upset about that. I was like, oh, they're the gatekeepers. Like, screw these guys for not letting me in. Like they should just let me in and let me be a designer there. And now that I hire, it's like I have this very high bar for the people I hire, and I realize there's a good reason for it. It's like there's lots of ways to go out and learn these skills on your own for free. Like you don't need access to a college education for this. You don't need access even to a job. Like I can do this volunteering in my free time. And to tie up this question about skills, I'll talk about skills that we talk about at work. But yeah, I think like before Facebook, yeah, I definitely needed the skills in order to get in the door. But to get into design, I didn't need those skills. Those are like the skills I learned on the job. And that just Facebook specifically, we talk about six skills. We divide them into like hard skills, which refer to your actual design work, and soft skills, which just refer to how you deal with people. And at a very high level, those 6 skills are like product thinking, which is how you can conceptualize like systems of work and how things, the interplay of different products, features, flows, whatever, and the consequences that they each have on each other. We think about interaction design, which is like how well you can do prototyping, how well you can design a feature to make it easy to use, functional, simple, There's visual design, which is just all about, primarily about like aesthetic and layout. Do you understand color? Do you understand typography? Can you present something in a simple way, just like at first glance? And in a way that's accessible also, importantly. And then there are like the people skills, which are just like, are you proactive? Are you like self-motivated and driven by your own goals rather than like waiting to hear from other people? Are you self-aware? Do you know where your faults are, and are you actively working on fixing those, or actively asking other people what those are so you can learn from them? Like those are the types of things that we're looking for in the people that we hire specifically. And I actually think, like, to drink the Kool-Aid at my work a little bit, they're actually really good skills I look at now just in designers in general, because they don't really apply just to Facebook. They're just applied to how we do design work.
Very good. Okay, last question. Just a little bit more about that freelance. Someone wants to know what rate would make sense for a newer designer, and also how do you find your first clients? Is Upwork worth it, or is there another resource that you've used?
Sure. If it's okay, actually, there's two people that made comments on previous questions. I just can give them an answer real quick.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I just saw that one. There's
Tamara or Tamara, I'm sorry, however way you pronounce your name. You mentioned about the case study too long question and how to make your case study as visual as possible. First of all, just like second that. Any chance that you get to make your case studies more visual and like have fewer words, I recommend it. I would have given you like another lecture I give internally at work, which is just about like how to make slides. And it's something I tried to keep to on my slides is like, I almost never bombard people with like a paragraph of text, because humans can barely, I think like the common knowledge is we can like internalize like 2 sentences of text at a time, spoken or written, before we're overwhelmed. And so if you're giving someone like paragraphs of something they're unfamiliar with, that they have no context with, that they can't relate to, you've already lost them to some degree. And then you haven't even factored in the fact that like everyone is a different type of learner. I'm a very visual learner. If I don't have a visual, I'm not going to understand something. Some other person might be an audio-based learner. They might want to hear like a narration of your design work along with the design work. Some other people might be like, a different type of learner where just reading it without any visuals at all is all they need. So just being mindful of the fact that everyone is going to consume your information in completely different ways will really help you to, cast the largest net that you can. And about hard skills, Lacey, do you have a specific question you wanted to ask about hard skills or what we can talk about? Okay, I'm assuming that's like product thinking that you're mentioning when you say more about the conceptual system. Yeah. So product thinking, you can look into it. It's not like a Facebook only jargon. It's kind of jargon that we use in the tech industry now. I think this is like commonly what people talk about when they talk about like design thinking. It's are you setting out with a specific problem in mind, and like are you going after that problem and solving it in an intentional way? Are you considering that like what you're designing or what you're creating doesn't exist in a vacuum? I think very often we think about design and we think about like, oh, I made like the experience of this one screen better, or I helped this app look a little bit cooler, or I made this flow easier. But when we think about systems design, we don't just think about individual screens, we don't think about individual flows, we think about like the interplay of all of those flows together. So a really good example of this is, I'll just give you, it's a very hard thing to conceptualize, but I'll try. When I worked on Facebook ads for a few years, we had a really hard problem in front of us anytime we like opened Sketch and tried to design anything, which is that like we were designing a product for advertisers to basically like build their ad campaigns on Facebook. And that would seem like a simple problem. Like the goal should just be how to make it as easy as possible for Facebook advertisers to do what they need to do. But the like hidden system inside of that if you're not paying attention, you're not designing for, is like anything that helps an advertiser we should help the advertisers where we can, but fundamentally like the point of the advertising business was to make Facebook money. So yeah, there it goes. So like anything we do to help advertisers also has to be in service of helping the business. And like everyone can relate to this. Sometimes you're designing for a user of your product, but you're also designing for that user of your product to use it in a very opinionated way. Like you want your user to spend more money, or you want your user to engage with something more. And I can critique that separately. There can be a lot of flaws with that, but like that's just a natural part of business and capitalism. And unless we want to have like a talk about how capitalism is a system that we can change, I'll save that for another day. Within the confines of that, you're always designing for a multiplicity of consequences. And so in my case, designing any product for a Facebook advertiser, if I made the experience better, the optimal outcome isn't just that the advertiser does their job better and they make more money. The optimal outcome is actually that the advertiser makes money, they're happy, and Facebook makes money, and we're happy. And even once I've done that, there's a third layer that a lot of people would forget, which is like, once I've done both of those jobs well, I still have to make sure that what I'm doing is not putting people in harm's way. An example of this is like, I could help an advertiser make a really specific, like target an ad to a really specific group of people who I know 100% will buy that product or do that thing. But if that feels really creepy or intrusive or overwhelming, then I'm hurting the people who we're relying on to make all these other things happen. So like anytime I designed a product, I was designing for Facebook, the business, the advertisers on Facebook, and the people on Facebook. And that was like it's a really hard thing to communicate, just showing someone a screen of a design, how all three of those things are impacted. And so product thinking is really about how you can conceptualize the consequences of the things that you build and the systems that exist around you. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, so we're a little bit over. Did you want to still answer that one last question about the freelancing? And then we'll just end there.
Yeah, there was something I was gonna say. Oh, it was about the rates, right?
Yeah, so it was about what to charge as a newer designer, and then also about where to find that first work. Is it Upwork or some other resources?
I think sadly that answer is still really dependent on like where you are and like physically where you are, even though we're all remote right now, but also maybe it matters less where you are in the world, but where you are in your career also really matters. And like what you have to offer people. You know, like I think I could have offered like a bunch of money early on in my career, or like charged a bunch of money, but I might have actually shot myself in the foot because it might have just been really hard to attract clients. And so like I didn't set my rates low, but they were lower than I charged later because I knew it was like a way to attract people. I don't know that I have a good answer for you. I think actually one advice I'd give like to myself looking back is I used to charge an hourly rate, and I realized like the fallacy in that is you just got like, you're incentivizing people to think of your work in hourly chunks and even like in a day's chunk. And that can really hurt you because your work should be more valuable than what you can accomplish in an hour or a day or even a week. And what a lot of people gave me advice on is like finding a way to bucket your work into project-based rates. Yeah, it's really useful to think about like how you could structure your rate in terms of a project and like what's a meaningful deliverable you can give to someone. And to get that, you can like calculate an hourly rate. Like it could be like 50 or 75 or $100 an hour. And then you calculate how much time it'll take you to do that thing, and that's your project rate. And I wouldn't be wary of like asking for more money. Like at the end of the day, what we're talking about is business. You're offering someone a service. The value you set is the value you're putting on your own head, which feels very counterintuitive. But like when you undersell yourself, you're literally only hurting yourself. Like you're making it easier for someone to take advantage of your labor. So find the kind of like local maxima between what the market is around you of like how much you could possibly charge someone, and find ways to justify why you're worth that much. And I promise you, like if you can get to a place where you can confidently like sell yourself, and like that's really the hard work, you're setting yourself up for more success because like you'll be doing less work, you'll be doing more work that you probably like, and people will respect you a little bit more. And that's kind of like the sad truth of the way that our system works is like the people who are paid the most or have the most power aren't necessarily people who deserve it. Like if we lived in a pure meritocracy, that would be the case. But in reality, it's just the people who demand those things for themselves, and they set the standard for everyone else to follow.
Cool. And then the other part of that question was just about where to find that work, especially when you're newer.
Oh yeah. One thing I don't know if it still exists. I really like this one website, hired.com. I wouldn't use like Upwork or Fiverr or any of those because those are like all, unfortunately, in my experience, like ways to commoditize your work, and you want to find ways to like help your work stand out. So like once you've crafted this good story for yourself, or once you have like, if you have connections, I got really lucky that like in the first startup I joined, I had a friend who had just graduated business school, and he started to introduce me to his friends, and just like this natural progression of people I introduced myself to. And I like supplemented that with finding websites like Hired, or I don't even know what exists anymore, to be honest. Designer News. Oh, it's hired.com. Look at it in the comments. I think this was it, if it still exists. There are good websites like this that let you set your rate up front. And they're less about like, they're less a job board for you to find work, and more a place where like you can present yourself and then like clients select you. I think that's really, that can be really nice.
Do you know about TopTal?
TOPTAL?
Yep. They have a process where you have to have like, I think 5 projects in your portfolio, and you go through an interview process.
Yeah.
And they, like, it's a pretty extensive process. And then it's the same kind of thing that you're saying, where they like give you a profile, and then people can choose you based on that. So they've already taught you about your rate and everything you can do. And then it's just, they're kind of like getting you work. You know, you haven't heard much about them?
I've heard of this. I don't know that much about it. Here, I'll put it in the chat because I'm looking at their website now. I haven't heard that much about them, but I think so long as they're not like demanding that much of you, go right ahead. The other thing I recommend, like a few of you I heard from are students, and so you all probably have a little bit more time than someone who's like freelancing, stuck in the middle of a pandemic and looking for work. But if you have the ability to like give yourself some runway of time, like 6 months or a year, and you're still looking to build your body of work to sell yourself better, one of the things I highly recommend is just like find places to volunteer to do your design work. You know, like look up, there was like Free Code Camp, or one of those websites where you can basically like design things for nonprofits who are looking for like a real product to be built. They just don't have the means to do it. And like you get the benefit of helping someone who otherwise doesn't have the money to do the work they need, who's not going to like monetarily benefit from the work you gave them for free. You know, you're helping a cause that is otherwise just needs volunteering work anyways. And I think if you can do that, or like side projects, and you have the time to flesh those out, just like the act of doing those will introduce you to the people that'll help you network and find the right jobs. And like naturally you'll find people who work at these different places, and they might let you know when there's a cool opportunity for you to look out for, or they might put you in the hat for a job. It's like one of the things like at Facebook, like I can refer people who I've worked with previously. And so I make a habit out of it now. Anytime like one of my old coworkers is looking for a job, it's a really easy, I don't make their odds any better or worse, but I can put their resume at the top of the pile and be like, hey, come work at Facebook or whatever company I'm at. And I've had so many ex-Facebook employees now try to poach me the same way, just because they're like, oh, we met on this one project a long time ago, working on this random thing, even if it was just like a outside of Facebook free fun thing. So don't discredit the value of like helping each other out and working on open source projects and stuff.
Love that. Okay, well, I think that concludes all of our questions, since we're kind of over now. And then anyone wants to stick around for some happy hour networking, I don't know, Keon, are you gonna hang out with us for a little bit, or do you have to get going?
I've got to get going. I actually have to drive from LA to Oakland tonight.
Oh, man, yeah, you should get going because the traffic is always horrendous in California. So
yeah, but I definitely recommend, if anyone wants to get in touch, like find me on LinkedIn, find me wherever, send me a message if you have any questions. I tend to be an open book.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great getting to know all of you.
Thank you so much. Everyone sounds like they loved it from the chat. I personally loved the whole talk. I thought you did a really great job. So your feedback from me is just, yeah, I think that you're an awesome speaker, and you should totally do this presentation again sometime for someone else. So.
Well, hopefully if you send me the recording, I'll never have to, but I'll do that.
That too. Great. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you all. Hope you have a good rest of your nights.
Thank you.
Ryan, are you going to put us into breakout rooms then?
Yeah. Why don't we do this? Let's, if you don't want to hang out and do just meet some random UXers and chat about what you're doing in quarantine and all that stuff, go ahead and drop off. And once the list starts to stabilize, still dropping, I'll break us out into some rooms and we can chat for maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so.
Do you guys mind if I drop off? I'm really sorry, but my dog is freaking out right now. So I think I'm gonna have to go, but I will hopefully make another one of these sometime. And it was nice seeing everyone again. Thank you so much. Brian, are you okay with taking this from here?
Yeah, I'll be here. Me and Prince.
Thank you so much.
All right, looks like we're starting to stabilize. So I'm gonna break us out in the rooms and we can all just kind of hang in for a little while and get to meet some other UXers.